Hey everybody, Virginia McClain here to do a reading of my own work. And tonight I am going to, rusty though it's going to be, read to you from my newest book, which is coming out on May 7th. It's called Sairo's Claw. And it is a new book in my Ginsokai world. However, it is not a continuation. Well, it's sort of a continuation of the series. It is a new set of characters. It takes place about 7 years, or cycles as they're called in Ginsokai, after the end of Trader's Hope, which is the second book in what is this more or less a duology of Blade's Edge and Trader's Hope, the Chronicles of Ginsokai. And this book sort of is, you could call it a book 3 to that, but it isn't really, though the characters from books 1 and 2 from Blade's Edge and Trader's Hope do make cameos in this book. But it is largely a kickoff to a new sub-series set in the same world, following a new set of characters. And lots of stuff shifts in this book. You need absolutely no prior knowledge of Blade's Edge and Trader's Hope to appreciate what happens in this book. And it is very much, pardon me. It is very much a standalone, separate from those. And it is also a standalone in that it finishes on its own. It concludes its own plot at the end, but it also does kick off, like I said, a new sub-series, and that's evident at the end. So it's not exactly cliffhanger-ish, but there's a new plot that's obviously starting at the end of this book. So this book is releasing in May, and I'm going to read from the first 2 sections. I mean, they're not really chapters. This whole series is separated by date. So basically we're not reading 2 whole days, but we're reading a very brief section from day 1 and then on to day 2. If anyone would like to ask questions, please pop those into the comments in the live chat. I will definitely be looking at those at the end. And I'm not going to read for too long. I don't know how much voice I've got left anyway. And also this is going to be a little bit rickety because this is new text. And while it has been edited once, it has not been fully proofed. There may yet be changes before it goes to final printing. So this is going to be slightly shaky. And I also have not read it aloud before. So really huge vote of confidence for myself there. I do still hope that you'll enjoy it, but keep in mind that it is not rough, but not fully polished either. And yeah, hopefully you enjoy it anyway. Again, Sairo's Claw is the title of the book, and at some point I'm going to try to share with you the cover image, because I don't have a physical copy of the book yet, but I do have a cover image that I can slap up here in a minute. But first, the reading. 10th day, 5th moon, cycle 8 of the Roju Council. Raku. This report is most enlightening, Raku-san. Raku bowed her head, touching the tatami that still smelled of whatever citrus mix had been used to clean it recently. She expected nothing less from the new council receiving room, but it still made her nose wrinkle slightly. You must inform me the moment you learn anything more along these lines, Suku insisted. Raku frowned, even as she brought her head up. You wish to hear from me in less than a moon? She asked. Of course, she enjoyed feeling like her work was appreciated, but delivering paperwork to New Council City more than once every 10 days seemed excessive, even to her. If you learn anything else about these agreements, then yes. Raku said nothing for a moment, and the gray-haired woman on the dais in front of her, composed and graceful as always, smiled and added, If it is more convenient, you may send your next missive by hawk. Now Raku raised an eyebrow. Of course it would be more convenient. It would also, under normal circumstances, be considered a waste of the hawk's time, regardless of the days of travel it would save her. I was not expecting these reports to incite so much curiosity, Tsuku-sama, she said, choosing her words carefully. Tsuku smiled again. never glancing at the guards who stood beside the doors in the otherwise empty chamber, but somehow Raku understood that the missing gesture was intentional. She had been working with Tsuku for a long time, after all. The people have gone a very long time without a proper account of their own history. I consider it of primary importance that we share as much of the truth as we can confirm without delay. Raku said nothing. She knew that Tsuku was indeed interested in the history that the Roju had hidden for so long. She wouldn't have a job still otherwise. After all, the work she had done to help depose the Roju was no longer needed, and if the new council had been more interested in burying the truth than uncovering it, she would not have found herself so gainfully employed in the secret archives that had been uncovered 7 cycles ago. But Tsuku's urgency suggested something else was afoot, and her reluctance to speak of it openly meant that there was someone who disapproved, someone high enough up for Tsuku to be concerned about spies in the receiving room. Raku bowed again. I'll be sure to send word as soon as I find anything else on the subject. And then she stood and turned to leave the room. She walked out of the enormous complex that housed the new council and all of their offices, through the expansive gardens that surrounded the compound, over the bridges that connected the gardens to the main roads in the city, and resisted the urge to check her pockets or her satchel before reaching her horse. In fact, it was only when she was all the way home in her woodland cave, the one that Taka and Kusuko had gifted her and Torako with 5 cycles prior, that she finally reassured herself that all 9 of the scrolls she had taken from the archives the morning of her interview were present. She was almost unsurprised to find that the one she'd been reporting to Tsuku-san about, the only one that had been in her possession overnight in the new council city, was missing. Day 1. 6th moon. Cycle 8 of the new council. Kaiyo. Kaiyo looked into the rolling mists and ran the small owl-topped seal through her fingers, tipping it absently, over one knuckle at a time. The combination of sea air and cloud cover left a tangy moisture on her tongue that she might normally have savored, but today she ignored it. Instead, she focused the entirety of her attention on listening. Beyond the creaking of the deck beneath her feet, beyond the bare whisper of her crew relaying hand signals up and down the afterdeck, straining to hear the enemy before they heard her, hoping that in doing so, she might live long enough to regret having volunteered herself and her crew for close patrol that morning. The near silence across the water stretched on, the fog muffling the soft sound of sails bending to the wind, gentling the already quiet slap of waves reprimanding the hull of the wind serpent. And well they might, for their scouts hadn't reported enemies within sight of the close patrol circuit in cycles. The most exciting part of this patrol should have been redirecting wayward fishermen from the mainland. Of course, it would be on her watch that they'd sight another sail through the fog. Far too large to be a fishing vessel, and not the faded blue of a Kaigun ship either. As she'd known the moment her lookout had called it out, all of her ships were accounted for. The stillness drew out like the tide, and her whole crew held ready. The only motion, the silent tip of her stone owl between her fingers, a motion she could not suppress, the only thing keeping her from screaming. Kaiyo's hands stilled as she caught the faint sound of something, muffled by the wind, the fog and the waves lapping against the hull. She strained to hear, wondering if it had only been her imagination, and then the silence was shattered utterly by the unmistakable, terror-inducing crack of cannon fire. "Down!" she cried, silently cursing whatever ill luck had put her ship in the path of an enemy armed with cannons. A great splash of seawater coated everyone on the Wind Serpent's deck, but the shot was low, falling far short of the ship's hull. Kaiyo and her crew were in motion the moment they realized that they were not dead. "Storm callers!" she cried, pulling herself to her feet and tucking the small owl-topped hanko into her pocket, even as she reached for the dagger on her belt. She hoped they were a long way off from daggers in close combat, but her crew approved of a bit of dramatic flair, and she would do whatever she could to focus them on the thrill of battle rather than the terror of cannon fire. "Ready!" she called, thrusting her dagger into the air for emphasis. She listened closely, for the sound of hatches sliding open on the spring-loaded tracks that turned her ship from a seemingly toothless sloop to its 30-gunned glory. "Aim!" she called next, wishing she could see the look of surprise on the approaching captain's face as the guns were run out of their hatches faster than should have been possible. "Fire!" she screamed, releasing the brunt of a full broadside on the massive ship that loomed above the wind serpent in the swiftly shifting fog. The guns cracked out as her crew timed their shots to the roll of the surf, and Kaiyo cursed whichever gaijin had invented the blasted things. They were as loud as they were devastating, and she wished they had never come into existence. But when the ships their patrols encountered had started carrying them, the Kaigun had no choice but to adapt them too. Raiko could devastate any ship, cannon or no, but if one hoped to convince the enemy to surrender rather than merely die, one had to outgun them, which was precisely what Kaiyo planned to do. "Run us home, Raiko-tachi," she called, brandishing her dagger in the air and pointing it towards Kaigun-jima. "Let's see how well these gaijin like the waters they're looking for." And I'm going to stop there, I think. How long have I read? 10 minutes. Sure, that's good enough. So that is the start of Saido's Claw, and I can always read another short section if there are no questions, which is a distinct possibility. But there you have it. That is the first time I have read aloud to anyone the beginning of Saido's Claw. And I'm going to see if I can share my screen to, oh, well, hang on. I guess I'll open the photo first. I'll show you the cover because why not? It's pretty and worth looking at, I think. Come on, there we go. And now I'll screen share that. Haha! And now you can look at the pretty cover. So hopefully that's what you're seeing. Yeah, there's Saido's Claw with a wolf face and a moon and some katana and the ocean. Should give you an idea of what we're looking at there with the book. So if anyone has questions, please ask them. And if no one has anything, I guess I can just keep reading a bit. And you're welcome to just encourage me to keep reading if you'd actually just like to hear more of the book. But yay, Devin says, ooh, in reference to the cover. Thanks, Devin. I hope people like it. I'm hoping it's clickable. Amanda says, oh, yay. Okay, great. Everyone, people like it. Yay. That's the cover. So yeah, that's the newest book. And thank you, A.F. Stewart. I really have loved writing this book. We didn't get into it yet because it's much further on in the book where the actual main character first appears. Well, there are two main characters. Actually, okay, there's like 5 point of view characters and 2 of them are the main characters. But they are, one of them is a mother and often has to stride into battle even with her daughter wrapped to her chest in a cloth wrap. So there's a lot of parts to this book that are very near and dear to me, and things that I've been, ways in which my life have changed since the last time I wrote any of these books. And I hope that people will really enjoy them. But I've got some questions coming in, so I'm going to switch to answering those for a second. And then if there aren't any more questions, I can read more or I can talk more about the origins of the book. But very much the story, part of the reason I've loved writing it so much is because there's a mother warrior character, which I really enjoyed writing. And so one of the questions I've gotten from AM Justice, Amanda, is how long did you live in Japan? The answer to that is 2 years, from 2009 to 2011. Lived there through the 2011 earthquake and tsunami, and stayed on through much of the Fukushima disaster. We left in August of that year, actually just around when things were calming down. We left for reasons that had nothing to do with the earthquake or the tsunami, but rather because, well, various reasons. One of which was that I very much missed my dog, who I was not able to bring with me to Japan. So that answers that question, and that has been the only question so far. If there are no more questions, I will certainly switch back to reading for a little bit, but I'd be very happy to answer some more questions too, because I'm not sure my reading's terribly on point. This book has a bit of a, well, I don't know, slow start. Dives right into some sea battles, which is great. But honestly, like the most relevant parts, the meatiest parts of the plot start a bit later. Let's see, Amanda says, very cool new take. Love the idea of someone balancing motherhood and fighting duties. Yeah, I really love that too. And for me, so I am the mother of a 4.5-year-old. And motherhood was not something I always envisioned as becoming part of my life. But I really have worked to embrace it as part of my identity. I mean, I chose to become a mom because I had a partner who really wanted to experience fatherhood, and I decided that it would be an adventure that would be worth having. But I've been very concerned the entire time about my identity as a mom versus just as a person, and all my various identities. And I've always identified strongly with warrior characters in fiction in particular. And so to write a warrior who was also a mom was something that was very important to me personally. Jessica Halsey has said, please read more. Great. Then I will go ahead and do that. I'll read one more section. Ooh, actually, the next section is really long. No wonder I cut off there. How much time do we have? Well, we do have 13 minutes. Is that right? I guess it is. Okay, I can read most of the next section. If anyone else has additional questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat and I'll get to them at the end. I'm going to read this next section. Hopefully it's not too long. That's all right. I think it should be fine. Okay, so just continuing on, we got to the end of the Kaiyo section, and we're switching perspectives again. Same day, so. Raku. Raku pushed her hair from her face and then frowned as the scent of ink grew sharper and her skin tightened ever so slightly in a line just above her nose. Kami, curse it, she muttered, reaching for the damp rag she kept on her lap desk. She wiped at her face and had to hope that she got it all. She didn't have time to go searching through their trunk to find the sole looking glass that Itachi hadn't managed to find and shatter in her toddler days. She wiped her fingers thoroughly, in hopes of preventing any more smudges on her face, and then she took up her brush again and refocused on the characters in the ancient text that she'd been puzzling over for half the morning. She hadn't added any new strokes to the crisp parchment pinned under her right wrist recently, but she was poised to do so anyway, as she glared at the faded, crumbling parchment to her left and willed it to make some kind of sense to her. Out, outer, outside. The characters in the scroll, which she was doing her best not to touch for fear she would destroy, were archaic at best. It had been almost 1,000 cycles since they'd been handled by a human, let alone since the time they were written, and Gensokan had changed quite a bit in that time. But the word she was stuck on wasn't just an archaic version of a word she knew, as most of these characters wound up being. It was something else altogether. Outside sea? What does that even mean? On land? But that doesn't make sense with the rest of this sentence. We agree to open trade with the following outside sea lands? No. On land lands? No, that's stupid. Why would they use land twice? Ugh, Kami, take this forsaken scroll. Why did ancient people talk in circles? Raku-san, are you there? Raku's head shot up at the sound of a familiar voice on the far side of the leather blanket that served as a door. Coming, she called, as she carefully returned the lid to her ink pot and wiped her hands on the rag once more. She didn't think anyone would be surprised to see her covered in ink, but she liked to at least attempt looking presentable. She'd used to be able to work with ink all day and still keep her clothes unblemished and her face clear of even the slightest smudge, but somehow that had changed since having a child, and she wasn't even certain how. Itachi wasn't even here. How her mere existence led to Raku being an ink-covered mess was something she'd never understand. Perhaps it had to do with the tiny ball of energy always occupying some portion of her mind. Perhaps it was the same part of her mind that usually kept track of whether or not her fingertips were stained. Ignoring that largely useless train of thought, she stood and headed to the door, such as it was, and pulled the flap aside to allow the bright summer sun into her small cave. Why had she not opened the flap as soon as the sun was up and full? She frowned, wondering when she'd become as distractible as Torako, but then her eyes focused on the faces of the two people standing outside her door, and the edges of the frown reversed themselves. Of course, people was perhaps not the most accurate term for the pair that stood before her. Certainly, the elder woman with the white streak in her lightly graying hair fit most people's definition. But the large tree standing just behind her, whose trunk split in two about halfway to the ground, and whose upper bark housed a crinkled face comprised of lichen, amber, and moss, was not what most humans would include in the term. Raku, of course, was not most humans, and she could not think of Yanagi-sama as anything other than people. Yanagi-sama, Tenshi-san. Sorry about that. I'm going to try that over again. Yanagi-sama, Tenshi-san, how lovely to see you both. Would you like to come in? She hoped she hadn't been staring at them too long before she spoke, but her brain was still stuck on the strange characters she'd been trying to modernize in her transcription only moments before. We can't stay long, Tenshi-san said, her bright green eyes reminding Raku warmly of two of her favorite people. But we wanted to let someone know where we were going. Raku nodded and gestured into the cave. Of course, she replied. I'm sorry that Torako-san and Itachi-chan aren't here right now. They're out on a patrol and won't be home for a few more days. They'll be sad to have missed you, especially if you're going to be away. Tenshi smiled, and the gesture made Raku unaccountably sad. Yanagi tutted from outside the doorway. You may bid me farewell once you are done with Tenshi-san, he rumbled, in a breath of wind through leaves and branches. Raku belatedly realized it might be rude to meet with Tenshi in her cave when Yanagi would not be able to fit unless he changed his shape. I'm sorry, Yanagi-sama, if you... But the tree kami had already wandered away and seemed to be ignoring her. He had planned to give us some time alone anyway, Raku-san. Don't worry, Tenshi said, patting her arm. Is everything all right? Raku asked, unable to ignore the feeling that something was off, despite how distracted she'd been a moment ago. I hope so, Tenshi replied. That's not reassuring. I'm afraid I didn't come here to reassure you, Tenshi replied. Ah. Well, is this warning for me or for Tora-chan? Raku asked, feeling her stomach drop, even as she did her best to sound flippant. Either. Both. Tenshi heaved a sigh that did nothing to reassure Raku. I wish Tora-chan could hear this from me instead of anyone else, but if anyone knows the importance of conveying information fully, it's you, Raku-san. So, if you would listen with the ears of a storyteller and repeat it with the accuracy of a scribe, I would be in your debt. Raku did not like how formal Tenshi was being, not even a little bit. The woman had been cuddling Itachi and sneaking her mochi the last time she'd visited, chuckling every time Raku pretended to be stern about the girl having too many sweets. Tenshi hadn't spoken this formally to her since the wedding. Formality had all but disappeared the moment Itachi had been born. You have my word, Tenshi-san, Raku said, reaching out to hold the older woman's hand, unable to resist the need to offer comfort to the woman who had done the same for her countless times in the past 4 cycles. Tenshi's smile seemed genuine, but did not quite reach her eyes, as she allowed Raku to take her hands and drew in a deep breath. I can't tell you much about what Yanagi-sama and I must do, because I'm not even that clear on what he needs me to accomplish, but we're going to help my father. Raku felt her eyebrows raised towards her hairline. Your father? You've never spoken of him before. Raku didn't add that Tenshi-san had never spoken of either of her parents before, besides a few offhand comments about things she had done with her own mother, as she was teaching Itachi how to fish, or how to hold a carving knife, or how to hide candies in her sleeves so her parents wouldn't notice. Instead, Raku waited to see what else Tenshi would add. I never do. In fact, until recently, I wasn't entirely certain who he was. But over the past few cycles, he has made himself known to me. And, well, he's the reason Yanagi-sama and I will be traveling to... Well, he's the reason we'll be away. Raku held her tongue for a moment, hoping that Tenshi wasn't planning to leave things that vague. What in the kami's names did she expect her to relay to Torako after this? When Tenchi didn't continue, Raku blew out a breath and said, Tenchi-san, you've asked me to speak with the words of a scribe, but you haven't given me much to pass on to your daughter. Do you wish me to tell her who her grandfather is? Or, at the very least, tell her where you've actually gone? Tenchi sighed. I hope to be back to tell her the details myself in a few 10 days at most. In the meantime, well, I suppose I wanted to be sure that you knew I was gone, in case you need someone to look after Itachi-chan. Yanagi-sama and I will both be out of reach, and I know he's the person you look to for Itachi's son's lessons. I thought it was best I tell you in person that neither of us would be here. Raku took a deep breath and turned to look out of her door at the tree spirit who seemed to be holding court with a crowd of forest animals. Perhaps he was delivering a similarly vague note of farewell. This concerns him too? She asked, hoping to drag a few more details from Tenchi. It does, Tenchi sighed. If you need to speak to us, well, it won't be easy. No, that won't do. Tatsu-sama will be able to get a message to me, or to Yanagi-sama, if there's an emergency. That had Raku frowning. It was a full 2 10-days travel to Tatsu-sama's mountain, and one could go almost anywhere in Gensokai in that amount of time. How on earth could it be faster to talk to Tatsu-sama than to simply find Tenchi and Yanagi wherever they were headed? Tenchi-san, are you? Raku shook her head then, because the notion she was about to suggest was impossible. What aren't you telling me? She asked instead. My father is not the normal kind of father. The other woman stumbled to a halt. Tenchi-san, forgive me, but you sounded like you wished to issue some kind of warning at the beginning of all this, and now, well, I'll struggle to tell Torako-san anything at all after this. Tenchi sighed again, and Raku could feel her jaw tense as she wondered if the woman had any intention of answering her with more than the barest vagaries. My father is a kami, Tenchi huffed at last. So he's no longer with us. Raku spoke softly. I'm sorry for your loss. No, he was never with us. He's not deceased. He was born in the spirit realm. Born in the... What are you saying, Tenchi-san? My father is the moon kami, Tsukuyomi. Raku simply let her mouth fall open. She wasn't certain what else to do. There were many problems with that statement, and she hadn't the slightest idea where to begin. Unfortunately, the base statement was the least problematic. It explained all too much. Are you saying the reason that your granddaughter is abnormally powerful is that she's actually 1/8 moon kami? Raku hissed. Tenchi looked a bit sheepish, even as she nodded. And in the past 4 cycles, it never occurred to you to tell her parents this bit of information? I didn't want you to worry, Tenchi began. But Raku cut her off before she could get any further. Does Tora-chan have any idea? I may have hinted at it when I told her about her own condition, but no, I've never told her about the entire truth. Lovely, Raku huffed, unable to contain her frustration. No wonder she didn't speak with you until Itachi-chan was born. The look of pain that crossed Tenchi's face when Raku said that made her wish the words unsaid. I'm sorry, Tenchi-san. That was cruel of me. Tenchi waved a hand at her as if to brush the apology away. You're not wrong. Torako-san has good reason not to speak with me. Had good reason not to speak with me until Itachi-chan was born. I won't pretend that I don't understand her anger, even if it hurts. I'm grateful she was willing to reconcile with me for the sake of my grandchild. And because there's only a minute left, I'm totally just going to cut off there. That's not the ending of that section, but there's still a few pages left, and there's only 1 minute left, and I don't want to bore you all to tears. So let's see. Do all your books have an Asian style setting? Yeah-ish. So the world, Gensokai specifically, that country, was inspired by feudal Japan. And so all of the books set in Gensokai have a feel of feudal Japan. However, the world that Gensokai exists in is not Earth. It's not even really an alternate Earth. I mean, except in that it's a M-class planet, if we want to use a Star Trek term, and has a bunch of people on it. And really, when you get into it, there's just sort of a coincidental culture that happens to be a lot like feudal Japan in this setting. However, one thing about this next series is that our perspectives broaden quite a bit, as you may have guessed from the second section I read, right? Like I read one with Raku and one with Kaiyo, and then one with then another one with Raku, and from the Kaiyo section, I think you can probably infer a few things about Ginsokai and the world around it that really haven't been evident in the books that already have been published in that world for very specific reasons. So there's a lot that's changing, shifting in this universe in this next book. So that really brings us to the end of our time. I'm going to let the 20-second lag go through. If anyone has any more questions, I'll answer them quickly because there's nothing on after us. This is the last event of the day. So if anyone has questions at all, I'll answer them. And if no one does have any questions, then I will just start to say goodbye for the evening and let you all go back to your lives for the night. Tomorrow, the first event of the day is, I believe, World Building 101. Let me double check that. Led by, I think, David Green. And yeah, World Building 101 is the very first event tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central. So please, that's a workshop. So if you want to bring something to workshop, bring a text, please do that. That would be lovely. I'm going to be the tech host for that. So you may see me a little bit in the background, but that's led by, I believe, David Green. So it'll be really exciting, a nice world building workshop at 9 a.m. And then from there, the day goes on with lots and lots of great programming. So please check out our schedule and be sure to ask for reminders for all of your favorite events throughout the day so you can catch those. Please go to the CornCon website and check out Artist Alley, where you can find books from some of our authors and art from many artists and a lot of wonderful things. And thanks so much, everyone, for saying hi and coming to watch. I see that Devin has said, thanks for reading. You're welcome. Thank you. Amanda says, you must be exhausted. Yes, I am. And it probably showed in how many times I stumbled on that reading. I'm so sorry. And Antoine says, damn, Virginia, on it all day. Yeah, all day yesterday and all day tomorrow. But it's all so much fun. And I'm so glad that we're doing it. And thank you all for being here. So that's it for me for the night, and we'll see you all tomorrow. 9 a.m. again is World Building 101. Don't miss it. I am definitely setting a couple of alarms because it's the first thing I have to do tomorrow, and I don't want to miss it either. All right, so yeah, that's it. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you on Friday morning. Bye-bye. Thanks, babe.